came across information about the Anunnaki. That's the name of the beings that, according to the ancient text, came from heaven to earth.
So then I thought, well, we better find out who owns the banks, because whoever owns the banks actually owns the oil companies. My research has these families, you can trace their lineage actually all the way back to Sumeria. But Zechariah Sitchin came along and he began to translate these literally. And they told about these Anunnaki who came to earth and occupied them and herded them into agriculture and began the cities of Ur and Babylon. And apparently some of these bloodlines from these families were part of this.
I have come to an inescapable and profoundly disturbing conclusion. I believe that an elite group of people and the corporations they run have gained control over not just our energy, food supply, education, and healthcare, but over virtually every aspect of our lives. And they do it by controlling the world of finance, not by creating more value, but by actually controlling the source of money. When I followed the money, I found that it took me up the levels of a pyramid. Here we are at the bottom level going about our daily lives. Above us is government, people who are given a monopoly on force and use it to tax and control us whether or not we agree. But who controls them? At the next level are the corporations. Many would say that it is now corporations and not nation states that rule the world. They call it a corporatocracy. To acquire the world's resources and control the markets, this corporatocracy must have access to cheap money. The big corporations get their loans at special rates from the big banks, which means that those who control the major banks, the moneyed elite, ultimately control the corporations. As I've followed the money, I've learned that almost everything I once believed about money is simply not true.
It's interesting how few questions we actually ask about very everyday things, like when we go into a bank and we ask for a loan of, say, $50,000, £50,000, what actually happens? You see, most people live their lives based on a kind of vague image of what happens. What actually happens is you ask for £50,000, they type into your account £50,000. That's all they do. They don't mint any coins, they don't print any money, they don't move any precious metal anywhere. They just put £50,000 into your account on a computer screen. From that moment, you start paying interest on money that has never, does not, and will never exist.
The United States exposes a shocking truth. The United States has always been, and still is, a British Crown colony. King James I was famous not for just changing the Bible into the King James Version, but for signing the first Charter of Virginia in 1606. That charter granted America's British forefathers a license to settle and colonize America. The charter also guaranteed that future kings and queens of England would have sovereign authority over all the citizens and colonized land in America stolen from the Indians. After America declared its independence from Great Britain, the Treaty of 1783 was signed. That treaty specifically identifies the King of England as the Prince of the United States and contradicts the belief that America won the War of Independence. Although King George III of England gave up most of his claims over his American colonies, he kept his right to continue receiving payment for his business venture of colonizing America. If America had really won the War of Independence, they would never have agreed to pay debts and reparations to the King of England. America's blood-soaked War of Independence against the British bankrupted America and turned its citizens into permanent debt slaves of the King. In the War of 1812, the British torched and burned to the ground the White House and all U.S. government buildings and destroyed ratification records of the U.S. Constitution. 1 century later, a corrupt U.S. Congress committed the biggest theft in world history. They passed Paul Warburg's Federal Reserve Act in 1913, handing over America's gold and silver reserves and total control of America's economy to the Rothschild banksters. Most Americans still believe that the Fed, or Federal Reserve, is the government. It is not. The Fed is a privately owned banking system whose majority Class A shareholders are the Rothschilds, Warburgs, Kuhn and Loeb, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, Israel Seif, and the Lehman Brothers. This private banking cartel is the Fed and is never audited and never pays taxes. They print and design America's money, which displays their symbols of an Egyptian pyramid, a Masonic all-seeing eye, and the words "In God We Trust." Who exactly is the God they trust? They also collect American taxpayers' money through the IRS. Then they loan it back again with interest to pay for roads, bridges, and other public works.
Folks, you all read the title right. The United Nations has got quite the plan. Holy smokes, let's switch over. I'm going to show you a picture of this called Our Common Agenda. Now, the person that wrote this is the UN Secretary General Gutierrez, and he calls for the following things. The first thing he calls for is a UN-led New World Order. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, he actually talks about this. A New World Order that is specifically led by the UN. He's also calling for a new financial system. What does he mean by a new financial system? Oh, you're going to love this, ladies and gentlemen. A digital one world currency that allows the tracking of all buying and selling. No joke. That's what they want.
To begin, could you give people just a little background of your history with FEMA?
And I was at FEMA. I was actually a source of Steve Quayle's, and I was getting him information of what was going on in the inside. The real agenda, if people go to the World Economic Forum that's held in Davos, they can see this big graphic, and if you click on the COVID-19, there's like this a spike. It looks like the spike coronavirus, and on each spike is a different disruption of all of society. So with basically the plan was to bring the whole world to a standstill and then inject global governance under the cover of COVID-19. But the goal, the ultimate goal, is depopulation.
They call themselves in the new world they want to create new evolution. But I say we take that and make it our own.